In one generation, China moved from chronic shortages to architect of global supply chains. It did not only grow exports, it rewired how production and logistics work. Prices, standards, and growth paths shifted across many economies. The drivers were clear: state direction, private risk, and fast technological leaps. The change began at the bottom. Countryside incentives raised yields and created local cash flow. Small factories grew near raw materials and labor. Coastal zones, foreign markets, and new infrastructure then cut the cost of time. China started to assemble at scale, and soon it began to set rules, industrial standards, digital payments, logistics playbooks. In this video, we break down how it happened, step by step, without hype and without myths. We will follow 8 steps that rewired the world economy. First come the rural reforms of the late 1970s. The household responsibility system lifted harvest and incomes. Township and village factories emerged from that base. Next are the coastal special economic zones. Rules were simpler. Foreign capital arrived, assembly clusters formed, geography became a policy tool. In a minute, you will see how one extra day in a container's journey can erase profit, and why ports and customs act as a hidden tax or a hidden subsidy. Then come the 1990s. Institutions are overhauled. People move from villages to cities. A window to global trade opens. Entry into the World Trade Organization in the early 2000s multiplies all previous gains. Vertical chains take shape. Design abroad, assembly in China, distribution worldwide. Global prices shift. After 2008, crisis turns into a lever. Roads, high-speed rail, and energy projects create domestic demand and cut transaction costs. Urbanization deepens. Next is the digital surge of the 2010s. Online commerce scales. Last-mile logistics gets dense. The smartphone cluster matures. Mobile payments become the lubricant for small and medium business. Milliseconds on a screen turn into billions in turnover. Then strategy moves to tech sovereignty and standards. Programs target key sectors. 5th-generation networks spread. Artificial intelligence and semiconductors climb the agenda. The dual circulation idea takes hold. The world responds with de-risking and new guardrails. Finally, we look at the external perimeter. Trade agreements, overseas logistics, and green exports expand. Electric vehicles, solar panels, and batteries make energy transitions cheaper for partners, but raise dependence on key components. By the end, we will fold everything into a simple model: state, market, and technology. The state sets direction and builds infrastructure. The market delivers competition and scale. Technology turns scattered solutions into standards. You will get a clear list of global influence mechanisms and a transferability checklist. Some things can be copied right away. Disciplined infrastructure delivery, competition between regions, fast regulatory sandboxes. Others depend on China's unique conditions: scale, command structure, demography, and stability. The turn began in the fields. Not in Beijing, but in village brigades. Collectives gave way to the household responsibility system. Families took charge of plots and accepted clear quotas. Anything above the quota could be sold. Incentives snapped into place. Yields rose, waste fell, and local cash finally appeared. With cash came decisions. A family could buy a small thresher, repair a pump, or hire neighbors for harvest time. Inputs mattered again because they shaped output. Tools were maintained, seed quality improved, and timing got sharper. The system felt simple: work more, keep more. That clarity changed behavior faster than any decree. Prices followed a dual track. The plan still bought a set amount at a fixed state price. Surplus could go to the market at a higher price. Cities stayed fed, and farmers gained a margin. One side preserved stability, the other taught real costs. Signals appeared without a shock to the system. Local officials watched and learned. They saw that surplus grain meant slack labor after harvest. They also saw that villages sat next to raw materials, small rivers, and county roads. The idea was obvious: turn the slack into output, help workshops formalize, extend electricity, carve a space in a warehouse, say yes to a new tool or line. Township and village enterprises took shape. They were not fully private and not fully state. Ownership was mixed, often cloudy by design. What mattered was speed. A mill could add a press. A press shop could add a simple die. A food line could add packaging. Each step moved a worker from field to bench without leaving the county. These firms started with short runs and low risk. They processed crops into oil and starch. They cut lumber, fired bricks, and cast simple parts. They stitched garments and assembled small appliances. They copied what worked and fixed what broke. Margins were thin, but positive. Cash flow was weekly, not yearly. That pace discipled managers more than any manual. Credit was basic but present. Rural credit cooperatives advanced small loans. Counties guaranteed a transformer or a shared truck. Power lines got thicker. A gravel road turned to asphalt. The unit cost of time fell. When time gets cheaper, more things make sense. Suddenly, a second shift became viable. A delivery twice a week turned into daily dispatch. Local cadres ran on an experiment, expand, legalize cycle. A village tried a contract type. If it worked, the county spread it. When scale raised questions, a province issued a rule. If the rule fit reality, the center adopted it. The ladder worked downward and upward. Rules followed practice, which kept failure local and progress national. Incentives for officials aligned with outcomes. Jobs, revenue, and new plants counted. Cadres who delivered got promoted. Those who blocked lost face and future. The result was focused pragmatism. Procedures were trimmed. Signatures were grouped. The message was plain: produce, learn, and move faster next quarter. A short example shows the logic. A county near a peanut belt set up a small press. Oil sold quickly in nearby towns. The press cake went to feed mills. Shells became board for crates. Within a year, a workshop added filters and better bottles. A local bank financed a labeling machine. A road upgrade cut an hour to the prefecture. Costs dropped, reliability rose, and orders grew. The same lane later shipped parts for small motors that drove the presses. One cluster fed another. Labor flowed from fields in measured steps. During planting and harvest, workshops ran lighter shifts. In the off-season, they ran full. Skills climbed with repetition. A worker who packed oil one season calibrated a filler the next. A foreman learned procurement because his factory needed caps and film on time. That quiet climb built a base of practical managers. Dual-track prices kept the bridge to the plan. A factory could still buy some inputs through state channels at fixed terms. It sold output in cash. The mix reduced risk while teaching cost control. It also revealed where bottlenecks lived. A substation, a customs window, a weighbridge at the county line. Remove the bottleneck, raise the margin. This was development by subtraction. Quality improved through simple routines. Checklists, jigs, and batch logs spread because they saved money. Scrap fell, rework fell, customers returned. A small exporter from the provincial capital placed a test order. The factory met the date, then negotiated better film and cartons for the next run. Iteration turned into habit. Habit turned into capability. None of this was smooth. Property rights were fuzzy. Some firms wore a red hat as collectives to access land and permits. Environmental controls lagged. Working hours were long. Credit chains snapped in bad seasons. But failure stayed local, and successful patterns climbed the ladder. The system learned faster than it broke. By the early 1980s, counties looked different. You could see new roofs on workshops, silos near roads, stacks of pallets by loading bays. You could hear shift whistles and the grind of small mixers. Farm plots were still there, but calendars now included batch schedules. The language of quotas shared space with the language of orders. A small but crucial change arrived with better accounting. Factories tracked unit costs, kilowatt hours per bottle, minutes per cut, rejects per 100. Managers learned where a minute vanished and where it could be saved. Saving a minute per step across a day turned into an extra pallet on the truck. 1 pallet a day paid for the new cutter in a season. This is how investment logic took root without the jargon. Success bred imitation. Neighboring counties copied the product, then differentiated on delivery or packaging. A few switched from food to components because their machines and skills were close to metal work. Staff who could keep a motor running could also assemble one. A supplier network formed by proximity and phone calls, not by planning memos. Local logistics set the ceiling. A dirt road limited scale. A paved road lifted it. The next ceiling was the county border and the provincial depot. Beyond that lay customs, a port, and a ship. Each step required new rules, new paperwork, and new speed. The first chapter of growth made one thing clear. If time was money, then the fastest money was near a port. Currency rules adapted just enough to keep motion. Export companies handled foreign exchange. They paid the county firm in local currency and handled the rest. The county learned about deadlines and specs without touching the complex parts of trade. Once the learning curve flattened, some firms wanted to manage customers directly. That desire pushed them outward. The pattern is visible in the numbers that mattered on the ground. More output per plot, more hours per machine, more trucks per week, more cash cycles per month. Each more was small, but together they changed the slope of the curve. A shallow slope became a climb became a staircase. The staircase pointed toward the coast. The social fabric adjusted. Dorms appeared near factories. Lunch stalls opened by the gates. A bus route added an early run for the morning shift. Local schools asked for courses in basic mechanics and bookkeeping. The next cohort left school with a habit of measurement and a sense that speed paid. By the end of this phase, 3 facts stood out. Incentives at the plot level lifted output fast. Dual-track pricing taught cost without risking supply. Local officials turned experiments into policy by moving first and legalizing second. Together they produced thousands of small bursts instead of one big shock. That choice built resilience. These small bursts created a new demand, faster channels to the world. Factories that could fill a container needed a place to send it. They needed simpler rules, quicker clearance, and partners with capital and know-how. Geography would soon become policy. The next step moved to the coast, where time and permission were redesigned for speed. Geography became policy. The coast turned into an engine. Zones were carved out with simpler rules and faster clocks. Land could be leased. Taxes were lower for a time. Customs worked on clear checklists. Permits came from one counter, not 10. The message to investors was direct. Build here and ship fast. The model was process trade. Bring parts in, assemble, send finished goods out. Duties were waived inside a bonded line. Time inside that line had a price. Buyers cared about dates more than slogans. A week early was useless. A day late was costly. Factories learned to live by schedules, not by favors. Capital and know-how crossed short straits. Managers came from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Toolmakers brought samples. Merchandisers brought purchase orders with tight specs. Local teams learned by doing. A line that stitched shirts one month could sew a simple jacket the next. A line that soldered toys could place components on boards within a year. Upgrades were small but constant. Parks offered plug-and-play shells, a standard bay with power, water, and loading docks, a dorm block nearby, a bus link to the train. The first day was a broom and chalk lines on the floor. The third month was lights, racks, jigs, and tack time. The park operator handled waste pickup and security. The firm focused on throughput. Ports and airports changed the ceiling, berths deepened, cranes multiplied. Yards added scanners and night shifts. Customs moved from stamps to codes. Clearance time fell from days to hours. Bonded trucking linked a factory gate to a terminal without extra stops. The dwell time of a container became a metric the line chief watched every morning. Here is a quick pocket math that every planner knew. Invoice value in a box is 200,000. Gross margin is 8%. That is 16,000. The contract sets a late penalty at 0.5% per day. 1 day late costs 1,000. That is more than 6% of the margin gone in 24 hours before demurrage or overtime. 1 day can erase a week of careful work. Clusters form by proximity and speed. Electronics settled in the Pearl River Delta. Footwear and apparel found room along the Fujian and Zhejiang coasts. Small appliances and toys filled gaps wherever a buyer had a trusted agent. Suppliers followed orders. Trims, buttons, foam, cartons, and tapes appeared within an hour's drive. Tool rooms copied dies, then designed their own. Inspection tables grew into quality labs. Contracts pushed discipline. Buyers audited plants. ISO checklists arrived. Labels had to survive heat and salt water. Color had to match the swatch under a lamp and in daylight. Schedules were measured in hours. A missed slot on a feeder ship meant a missed slot on a mother vessel. The cost was not theory. It appeared as chargebacks and refused shipments. Provinces competed in a tournament of results. Jobs, exports, and fixed investment were scored and compared. A governor who landed a battery line or a new berth earned prestige and leverage. A county that cut permit time in half drew headlines and capital. Money followed predictability. Predictability followed the fastest rulebook. Local banks learned the needs of export plants. Working capital was the lifeblood. Cash cycles sped up with better turnover. A factory that once waited 60 days for payment now waited 30 because the buyer trusted its delivery record. The interest burden fell with each day saved. This made scale safer. Labor moved toward the coast. Dormitory factories grew by thousands of beds. Rotations mapped onto trains and festivals. Managers built schedules around planting and harvest back home. Wages were simple but certain. A bonus for 0 defects. A bonus for 0 absentee days. The huku system still shaped access to services, but the pull of cash and training was stronger than the push of home plots. The supply pyramid thickened. Assemblers taught Tier 1 suppliers to meet ship dates. Tier 1s taught Tier 2s to lock in specs. A missed tolerance upstream could ruin a batch downstream. Checklists flowed backward along the chain. Price talks were blunt. If you save a minute per unit, we split the gain. Saving showed up as line speed, not as slogans. Government tweaked rules to keep motion. Exporters could retain part of their foreign exchange to buy better equipment. Bonded warehouses let firms hold inventory close to the port without tax friction. Land use rights lasted long enough to justify a custom line or a cleaning room. Each tweak cut one source of hesitation. Time became the core margin. The fastest plants built a rhythm. Order, procure, assemble, test, pack, truck, clear, sail. Night runs were common. So were light buffers at the end of the line. A small finished goods stock could catch a broken machine or a blocked road. Managers paid for that buffer because it saved the week. Failures taught lessons without ending the game. A missed ship taught the value of a second trucking vendor. A rusty container taught the value of desiccant packs. A claim for bent cartons taught the value of corner posts. A rejected lot taught the value of first article inspection. The same plant rarely made the same mistake twice. Prices at the shelf changed abroad. Big retailers sourced directly. Factory to store replaced layers of traders. The famous everyday low price rested on thousands of tight handshakes and a C schedule pinned to a wall. The result was visible to consumers, but the work that made it possible lived in docks, scanners, and shiftboards. The coastal engine spun faster than inland systems could support. Power plants and substations raced to keep up. Expressways filled with container trucks. City belts widened. The air darkened in some districts. The benefits were large and uneven. This imbalance set the stage for the next turn. Align institutions with growth rather than chase it from behind. A pivot was needed in the early 1990s. Ownership rules had to clarify. State firms had to merge or exit lines they could not run well. Banks had to clean balance sheets and fund what worked. Migrant workers needed a more stable place in city life. The cue for acceleration would come from the top, and the funnel would be urban. The next phase pulls reforms into the core of the system and opens the window to global trade at full scale. The signal came from the top and from the coast. A senior leader toured southern factories and said the quiet part out loud: "Speed is good if it works." The message reached provinces, banks, and city halls: move faster, make rules fit growth, not the other way around. The 1990s became a decade of alignment. Ownership rules started to clarify. Many state firms were too small or too tired to compete. The policy was blunt: keep the large and strategic, release the small and weak. Some merged, some closed. Some became shareholding companies with mixed owners. Managers were told to watch cash and customers, not only plans. A factory that could meet dates and make margin lived. One that could not, exited. Banks learned new tasks. They still serve policy, but they had to judge risk. Special vehicles took bad loans off balance sheets. Policy banks funded long projects. Commercial banks funded lines with orders. The test was repayment from operations, not favors. A firm with recurring purchase orders got working capital. A firm without them waited. Credit began to follow throughput. Cities built the funnel. Land could be leased for long terms. That lease gave collateral. Roads and feeders grew around industrial parks. Power and telecom capacity expanded. A business license could come from one office with a checklist and a seal. Quality bureaus and inspection labs were easier to reach. Arbitration panels handled routine disputes so trucks could keep moving. Tax rules were reset to stabilize the center and push provinces to grow their base. Cities had reasons to attract plants, logistics hubs, and service firms. They needed the revenue. They also needed the jobs to keep order. This tied local ambition to factory schedules and ship timetables. It also created a discipline. If you delay permits, firms go next door. Migration turned rural slack into urban output. Millions left villages for dormitories near gates. The hukou system still limited access to schools and clinics, so firms built partial substitutes, clinics on site, canteens, day rooms, and shuttle buses. Pay was not high, but it was cash and on time. Training was basic but real. A worker could double their income in a year by moving one province east and learning one more station on the line. Here is a simple dorm story. A worker pays a small deposit for a bunk and locker. Meals cost a few coins, deducted at month end. Overtime pays extra. After remitting money home, they still keep enough to buy a fan, a phone card, and a second pair of shoes. The factory gains a stable hand for the evening shift. The city gains a customer for noodles and phone time. The numbers are small, but the cycle is fast. Fast cycles compound. Urban life adjusted. Private bus routes appeared to connect dorm zones and parks. Street vendors synced hours with shift changes. Clinics learned to treat repetitive strain and minor cuts fast. Night schools opened classes in bookkeeping, CAD basics, and machine maintenance. People who had never kept time by a clock learned to think in slots, batches, and ship windows. Firms moved up small steps. A garment plant added buttonholers with counters. A toy plant bought a reflow oven and hired a technician who knew profiles. A food processor added HACCP routines and a metal detector. A pump maker hired a planner to keep spare parts in bins, not in piles. Each upgrade cost a little, saved a little, and raised reliability. Reliability won contracts. The legal shell improved just enough to hold growth. Company law gave a common form for shares and boards. Bankruptcy rules gave exits that did not poison a whole supply chain. Labor rules set minimums for hours and safety. Environmental enforcement was uneven, but the idea of limits entered daily decisions. Plants learned that smoke invited a visit, and a visit could pause a line. Capital markets opened a narrow door. Listings in coastal exchanges let a handful of firms raise equity. Bond pilots let cities finance pipes and roads. For most firms, bank lines still mattered most, but the presence of a price for shares and debt changed conversation. Returns were not only a slogan, they were a number that others could see. Exchange rate and trade rules aimed at predictability. Exporters could plan quotes. Importers of equipment could plan payments. The customs code grew more specific. HS codes, certificates of origin, testing protocols, all became part of the normal business. The gray zone shrank where speed was critical. A known rule beat a favor that took a week. Costs shifted inside the city. Land was dearer near the port. Labor was dearer near the best parks. Firms that did not need immediate export access moved inland by a ring or two. This created corridors, assembly at the coast, parts 1 or 2 hours inland, raw materials further back. Rail yards and ring roads turned these tiers into a working map. The social costs of speed were visible. Layoffs at state firms created waiting workers and re-employment centers. Not everyone could jump to a private plant or move across a province. Schools in big cities strained, rentals crowded, air worsened near clusters. The state answered with a mix of cash support, training vouchers, and more work sites. It was not perfect. It was enough to keep motion. Management habits matured. S&OP meetings appeared, even if the name was not used. Weekly boards showed orders, inputs, work in process, and finished goods. A missed component got a red tag. A missed delivery got a phone call 2 rungs up the chain. Takt times were written on whiteboards. What gets measured gets managed, turned from a book line into a shift rule. Suppliers learned to certify. Incoming inspection shifted from look and guess to measure and log. Calipers and micrometers were standard. Gauge blocks appeared, color booths appeared. A failed batch at 9 a.m. still left time to rework and make the 8 p.m. truck. That window kept relationships alive and penalties low. The city's clock and the factory's clock began to sync. Banks created bridges for exporters and their tiers. Factoring for receivables reduced cash droughts between shipment and payment. Letters of credit became routine, not exotic. Insurance for export credit covered a few shocks that would have sunk a small firm. With each new tool, the cost of being small fell a bit. Scale was still an advantage, but it was no longer the only protection. Ports and cities built inland links. Dry ports allowed customs clearance away from the water. Containers could be sealed at an inland depot and moved to the quay without delay. This pulled interior counties into the coastal rhythm. A plant 2 hours inland could now promise a ship date with confidence. Confidence is currency in trade. It bought better terms. Standards spread outside factories. Hotel chains set the same mattress and check-in time from city to city. Courier firms promised next-day delivery between major nodes. Mobile networks covered highways and dorm blocks. A worker could call home from a stairwell. A manager could confirm a container's gate in time while riding a shuttle. Communication cut guesswork. Cutting guesswork cut buffers. The state kept a hand on the tiller. Strategic sectors stayed under tight control. Energy, steel, telecom backbones, and rail set the pace for everyone else. When power was tight, factories staggered shifts. When land was tight, multi-story workshops replaced sprawling sheds. When pollution rose, schedules bent around inspection calendars. The private rhythm fit inside the public frame. By the end of the 1990s, the system had a new shape. Cities held the funnel. Banks could pick winners by output, not by slogans. Managers could plan a quarter with some confidence. Migrant labor gave factories the flexibility to ramp and pause. The law gave just enough clarity to sign contracts that meant something. The map from order to ship was readable and repeatable. A final pocket math underlines the change. A plant with a 5% net margin can lose it in paperwork delays and rework. If better schedules and fewer defects save 2 days per month across the chain, the same plant can gain a point of margin without changing its price. 1 point decides whether a bank renews a line. Renewal decides whether a new machine arrives before peak season. Small deltas rule big outcomes. Institutions and cities were now aligned with growth. The funnel worked. The next logical step was to open it wider to the world. Market rules at home met market access abroad. The door that mattered was global and rule-bound. When that door opened, prior gains multiplied. The next chapter is that door. Entry into the world trading system and the export decade that followed. The door opened to a rule-bound world. Accession to the global trading system set clear tariffs, dispute paths, and schedules. Predictability replaced guesswork. Contracts could scale without a new negotiation for every shipment. Quotas and duties moved on published timelines. Firms built calendars around them. Buyers wrote multi-year frames instead of quarter by quarter. Plants could justify a line that paid back over several seasons, not just a rush order. Vertical chains tightened. Design and branding stayed abroad. Precision parts came from nearby Asian hubs. Assembly sat in coastal cities with deep ports. Distribution spread through global retailers and catalog platforms. The chart looked simple. The work behind it was not. Exchange rate policy and rising productivity did the heavy lifting on price. Costs fell per unit. Learning curves were steep. The headline effect reached stores far from the ports. Shoppers saw lower shelf tags. The everyday low price story rested on minute savings in hundreds of steps. Logistics reached a new scale. Terminals added berths, cranes, and scanners. Yard software scheduled boxes by the hour. Feeder ships met mother vessels like clockwork. Dwell time became as important as labor cost. A box that sat was a cost without value. Process trade matured. Components crossed bonded lines, were assembled, and left as finished goods. Rules were strict but clear. Waivers and rebates matched forms and barcodes. A plant manager could read the code and know the cash impact by Friday. Compliance came with access. Buyers audited quality, safety, and social practices. Labs tested toys, textiles, and electronics against destination rules. Substances lists and labeling rules multiplied. Plants learned to pass audits on the first try because the second try cost a slot on a ship. Information flowed earlier and faster. Purchase orders moved by EDI, then by APIs. Scanned data from stores fed forecasts. Vendor-managed inventory appeared in large accounts. A firm that could see demand a week sooner could start a line a day sooner. A day sooner was a week safer. Here is pocket math that every merchandiser knew. A tariff drop of 2% on a $500,000 order is $10,000 saved. The buyer asks for half. The supplier keeps half. Both sign. The new price locks in for the next run. Volume grows because price and delivery are reliable. Clusters specialized and deepened. Apparel and footwear refined cutting rooms, dye houses and trim suppliers. Electronics built SMT lines, reflow profiles, and test fixtures. Small appliances integrated motors and plastics. Each cluster had a vocabulary: stitch length, pick and place speed, torque specs. That language spread from engineers to line leads. Retailers changed their own playbooks. Direct sourcing replaced layers of agents. Private labels grew. Packaging optimized for pallets and shelf depth. Promotions aligned with sailing schedules. In stock became a promise tied to a vessel ETA and a warehouse slot. Finance matched the rhythm. Letters of credit, documentary collections, and export credit insurance became routine. Banks discounted receivables at tighter spreads for proven plants. Payment terms moved from 90 days to 60, then to 30 for top performers. Cash cycles shortened. The cost of capital fell in real terms. Commodity demand surged. Steel, copper, and energy fed mills, foundries, and kilns. Shipping rates rose with volume. Resource exporters booked windfalls and built budgets on them. The loop was simple. Demand from factories pulled raw materials across oceans and pushed cash the other way. Risk management became part of daily work. Plants hedged resin and copper. Buyers split orders across 2 ports. Forwarders booked backup sailings in peak season. A missed transshipment once in August was enough to justify redundancy for every August after that. Standards set borders inside the border. A toy that failed a tensile test did not leave the gate. A garment that bled dye did not pass final inspection. An adapter that ran hot in a chamber did not get a label. The cheapest part was the one that met the spec the first time. Defect math was ruthless. A return rate of 1% on a 100,000 unit run is 1,000 headaches. If each costs $15 to handle, that is 15,000 gone. Remove half the defects and you save more than many line tweaks produce. Quality was not a slogan, it was margin. Ports became systems, not places. Dry ports handled customs inland, sealed containers rode rails to deep water. The inland plant could promise a ship date like a coastal one. That promise won bids. Bids won scale. Scale paid for better molds, presses, and testers. Margins were thin but real. The plants that lived respected time. Changeovers were planned. Buffers were small and placed at the right step. Maintenance was preventative, not heroic. The hero was a plan that no one noticed because it worked. Global brands used the decade to rewire their own maps. Some moved final assembly to the source to gain speed. Some kept late customization close to the market to cut risk. Both models used the same base, a reliable schedule from plant to port to shelf. Policy stayed in the frame. Export taxes adjusted where overheating appeared. VAT rebates changed to guide product mix. Environmental rules began to bite in heavy districts. Power rationing in hot summers pushed non-critical shifts to nights. Plants adapted. The schedule bent but did not break. Small firms found ways to plug in. A trim maker served 5 apparel plants. A stencil shop served 10 PCB lines. A carton plant learned 5 die-cut patterns and printed them perfectly every time. Niche reliability beat scale in these slots. The network thickened without a single plan. The global side also pushed back. Anti-dumping cases, safety scares, and new certification rules raised the bar. Reputation became an asset. A plant that passed hard audits won business when a neighbor stumbled. The lesson was simple. Compliance is not a cost center, it is a sales team. Retail everyday low price met household reality. Appliances and clothing were cheaper in many markets than a decade earlier in real terms. Consumers did not see the cranes or the compliance logs, they saw a tag and a warranty card. The invisible machinery behind the tag ran on the clock set in the export decade. A supply chain map told the story of reach. One apparel order touched cotton in one country, yarn in a second, fabric in a third, trim in a fourth, and sewing in a fifth. Electronics were the same with chips, boards, plastics, and final test. The border list was long, the container count was longer. By mid-decade, the system was fast and exposed. It depended on steady buyers abroad, cheap capital, open lanes, and stable risk. A shock on any axis could cut orders, stretch payments, and idle lines. That shock arrived from the financial side, then spread everywhere. The test came with the global crisis. Orders paused, credit tightened, idle boxes piled up. Many plants cut shifts or went dark for weeks. The response would define the next phase. Use the slowdown to build the next platform, rather than wait for wind to return. The answer reached for concrete and steel. If time was the core margin, the state could make time cheaper inside the country. Roads, high-speed rail, power and urban links would lower costs and create demand. The export machine would get a second engine. The next chapter is that engine, stimulus, infrastructure, and the turn toward a larger home market. The shock hit fast. Orders stalled, lines ran short shifts or went dark, containers waited without bookings. The answer was not to sit still. The answer was to make time cheaper inside the country. Concrete, steel, and wires would carry the load until foreign demand returned. The plan pushed money to places that could move. Banks were told to lend to projects with drawings and permits. Local vehicles raised funds against land leases and future tolls. Central budgets covered trunk lines and grids. It was not one valve. It was many small valves opened at once so the pressure spread. Roads lengthened and thickened. Expressways closed gaps between factory belts and inland basins. Interchanges removed choke points that burned diesel and hours. A truck that lost 20 minutes at a merge now sailed through. 20 minutes off a daily run is a free extra delivery every 2 weeks. That pays for the driver's raise without raising prices. Rails multiplied and changed character. High-speed lines cut a day trip into a morning trip. Managers could inspect a plant at 10 a.m., sign a fix at noon, and be back on the floor by 4. Suppliers could meet in person and still make the evening shift. The country shrank to schedules that businesses could trust. Here is the 1-hour rule of thumb that people learned to use. If a city can reach another in 1 hour door to door, the labor markets blend. Recruiters can fish both ponds. If the link is 2 hours, supplier markets blend. A machine shop can serve both parks without burning a day. If the link is 3 hours, customers blend for day trips. Deals close faster because the friction is lower. Grids went up and out. New lines carried power from basins and coasts to factories and new districts. Substations grew near parks. Voltage stayed stable when a line started. Welders sparked clean arcs. Plating baths held temperature. The hidden quality problems tied to dirty power dropped without a memo. Cities dug down and rose up. Subways and bus rapid transit let workers live farther and still arrive on time. Overpasses separated truck lanes from urban traffic. Urban rings gave freight a way around choke points near schools and markets. The clock inside the city matched the clock at the plant. Water and environment got a push, even if uneven. Treatment plants followed new housing and parks. Flood control cut the chance that a storm erased a week of production. The message was practical. Protect schedules, then improve the rest. It was not neat, but it was progress that showed up in uptime. Construction became an industry with muscle memory. Design codes were unified. Bid packages came in familiar formats. Inspection checklists looked the same from province to province. Crews learned to pour, cure, crane, and pave with fewer surprises. Every bridge poured this year made next year's bridge cheaper in hours, not only in money. Finance had a clear rhyme. A city issued a land lease for a block near a new station. The lease funded the station and the road to it. The station raised the lease value of the next block. Banks lent against that loop because trains were running and shops were open. Risks were real, but the cash cycle was visible on the ground. Households were pulled into the loop. Programs nudged people to buy basic appliances and small cars. Factories that had lost overseas orders changed lines to meet these shapes of demand. A washer for a county town replaced a batch of export models. A parts supplier who once made trim for foreign brands made brackets for a local model. The learning did not go to waste. Warehouses multiplied on the edges of cities. Cross-docks learned to turn trucks in under an hour. Barcode guns became standard. Dispatchers started to think in waves and cut-off times. Same-day transfers between hubs became normal within regions. That discipline set the table for a parcel boom that would arrive with smartphones. Pocket math turned into policy. If a regional rail cut 3 hours off a delivery, a distributor could run 1 truck instead of 2 for the same route. If a metro line moved 10,000 riders per hour, a factory could hire a shift from 2 districts away. If a new substation cut voltage dips in half, scrap fell enough to pay for the next machine. These were not theories. Managers wrote them on whiteboards. The debt that paid for speed was not free. Local vehicles stacked obligations. Some projects missed their demand forecasts. Some stations were quiet at first. Steel and cement capacity overshot. The system carried these costs because the core assets lowered national time costs. Lower time costs raised the floor of productivity for almost everything else. Firms reorganized around the new map. A plant moved a line inland where land was cheaper because trains and toll roads made delivery times similar. Headquarters stayed near the port and the airport. Testing labs stayed near clusters of customers. The shape was hub and spoke, but the spokes were steel rails and asphalt, not guesswork. Maintenance matured with scale. Expressways got firms that did nothing but keep lanes open and signs readable. Railways scheduled night windows for inspections and swapped parts before failure. Grid operators added remote monitoring and dispatch. Preventative care replaced heroic repairs that used to steal days. Safety and standards followed the volume. Guardrails, bridge bearings, signal logic, and tunnel ventilation met national specs. That made parts interchangeable and spare pools rational. When a city bought a new line of buses or trains, it could use the same depot tools as its neighbor. Procurement got faster because it reused proof. The urban consumer appeared in numbers. Cafes and clinics filled ground floors near stations. Delivery riders found short routes between new towers. Small services bloomed: shoe repairs, phone shops, dental rooms. Cash traded for convenience. Convenience traded for time. Time returned to factories as a more punctual shift. Digital seeds sprouted in this soil. Industrial parks lit with stable fiber. Couriers mapped routes with early apps. Online sellers promised next-day delivery to places that had been 2 days away. Payment gateways proved they could reconcile thousands of small orders and push cash to merchants fast enough to restock. Phones were getting smarter. Networks were getting denser. The pipes for data and parcels were in place. There were misses and costs. Some roads were too wide for the traffic they got. Some stations stood empty at off-peak hours. Some counties chased vanity projects. But the aggregate effect was clear in the metrics that mattered. Shorter lead times, higher delivery reliability, fewer line stops for lack of power, wider hiring pools, and faster service loops in cities. A simple factory day shows the new rhythm. A line breaks a sensor at 9 a.m. A tech rides a metro 2 stops and arrives at 9:40. A part is in a bin at a distributor on the ring road. A courier brings it in before lunch because the cross-dock cutoff is noon. The line restarts at 1 p.m. The evening truck makes the 8 p.m. gate. No drama, just a chain that held. The export engine did not die. It got a partner. Domestic demand, smoother logistics, and stable power made it safer to plan for the home market. Firms began to split product trees. One branch for abroad, one for here. The skills overlapped. The buffers were smaller. The cycle was faster. By the early 2010s, the platform was laid. Steel in the ground, copper on towers, fiber in conduits, schedules on walls. The price of a minute was lower inside the country than it had ever been. When the price of a minute falls, two things happen. Services scale and software finds room to work. The next step followed naturally. Smartphones met cheap logistics. E-commerce met reliable payments. A tap could trigger a picker, a sorter, and a courier with high confidence. That confidence is what turns a click into a business. The system was ready for a digital leap, from copying to designing, from selling offline to orchestrating flows in real time. The pipes were ready, trains ran on time, roads and cross docks hit tight cutoffs, power was stable, fiber reached parks and towers, phones got smarter, software filled the gaps that concrete could not fill. The 2010s turned infrastructure into platforms. Retail moved to screens. Marketplaces gave every shop a stall. Listing, payment, and delivery came in one flow. Rating stood in for trust. Photos stood in for displays. A village workshop could sell a part nationwide without renting a storefront. A city brand could reach a county town without a distributor. The order path became a script. Tap on a phone, stock reserved in a warehouse, a picker gets a task on a handheld, a bin rides a belt to a sorter, a label prints with a route code, a courier scans, loads and leaves. Each scan updates the buyer. Each update lowers support calls. The buyer trusts the next tap a little more. Milliseconds mattered. Load a page in 1 second, not 2, and fewer buyers drop. Show a delivery promise by the 3rd screen, not the 5th, and more buyers confirm. A failed payment loses the basket. A successful payment in under a second keeps the habit. Small delays are big cost at scale. Mobile payments removed grit. Wallets stored value. QR codes replaced terminals. Escrow reduced fear. Money moved when goods moved. Settlement to small merchants came fast enough to restock. Street vendors, clinics, tutors, and taxis took phones instead of cash. The long tail got a ledger. Pocket math turned adoption into routine. If a courier can do 1 more stop per hour because addresses autofill and routes optimize, that is 8 more stops per day. 8 stops times 20 days is 160 stops per month. Spread across thousands of couriers, the platform pays for a sortation upgrade without raising fees. Warehouses learned new tricks. Zones for fast movers sat near docks. Slow movers sat high and far. Wave picking reduced walking. Night shifts pre-packed regional bags for first runs. Cross-docks hit 30-minute targets for incoming to outgoing. The warehouse clock synced to the courier clock and to the app clock. Returns were engineered, not feared. A code on the phone generated a label. Lockers accepted drop-offs without queues. Refunds landed before the next pay cycle. Sellers priced returns into margin and built better-sized charts. Better charts cut returns. Cutting returns raised margin more than another promo ever did. The smartphone cluster matured. Board houses placed chips faster, camera modules improved, displays thinned, batteries got denser and safer. ODMs moved from contract builds to co-designs, then to house brands. Antennas, speakers, haptics, and seals were tuned in-house. The gap between copy and design narrowed with each product cycle. Component supply tightened into local webs. Lens grinders, FPC makers, mold shops, and coating lines sat within hours of each other. A change in a drawing at 10 a.m. could become a sample by afternoon. This cycle speed turned into a weapon. A mid-range model could add a feature in weeks, not seasons. Education fed the loop. Universities produced engineers in large cohorts. Polytechnics taught line leaders, mold techs, and test techs. Coding boot camps filled gaps in front-end and data work. Students learned to ship features, not just write code. Capstone projects looked like small products, not term papers. Cloud services and CDNs took load-off shops. A small seller did not need a server. A mid-sized brand could run live streams without frame drops. Traffic spikes during sales did not crash carts. Logs turned into dashboards. Dashboards turned into decisions. Change the hero image, move the button, split the offer by region. Testing became a habit. Fraud controls hardened. Devices and behavior left patterns. Risk engines scored transactions in real time. Most good payments cleared in under a second. Bad patterns slowed or failed. Loss rates fell to levels that kept fees low. Low fees kept adoption high. Adoption attracted more sellers. The flywheel was discipline, not magic. Micro merchants found services built for them. Invoices, inventory, and simple accounting lived in an app. Tax filing had a guided path. Delivery slots could be booked from a phone. Group buy models tied neighborhoods to daily trucks. Fresh food moved on tighter cold chains because orders were dense and predictable. The platform era created new jobs. Couriers, sorters, live stream hosts, content editors, and ad ops filled the grid. Scheduling was flexible, sometimes too flexible. Safety gear and insurance lagged, then improved under pressure. The system learned by friction. As before, experiment, expand, legalize. Energy tech scaled alongside screens. Solar panel lines multiplied, inverters improved. Wind towers and nacelles rolled out of coastal plants. Battery plants learned to coat, calendar, and stack at speed. Unit costs fell with each doubling of output. Lower costs moved projects from nice idea to bankable. Pocket math showed why learning rates mattered. If a battery pack falls in cost by small steps each quarter, an electric scooter beats a gasoline scooter on total cost in cities. Couriers switch because charging fits shift patterns and saves money. The switch densifies demand for cells. Densified demand cuts cost again. Feedback loops paid real bills. Cities adapted to last-mile needs. Lockers appeared in lobbies. Meters and fire codes learned to coexist with charging rooms. Small e-vehicles got lanes and charging rules. Building managers made delivery windows and mapped elevators. Friction fell where the volume was highest. Design shifted closer to the user. Feedback from reviews and returns arrived fast. Teams changed materials or firmware and pushed new lots. Camera algorithms improved in software. Power management tuned to new cells. The line between hardware and software blurred at the release cycle, not only in slides. Platform tools went horizontal. Factories adopted MS and basic digital twins to watch lines. Shops used ad managers with real auctions and attribution windows. Brands built private traffic with mini programs inside super apps. Suppliers shared stock data with big buyers through simple APIs. 1,000 small integrations replaced 100 big committees. The state set guardrails. Real name registration tied accounts to people. Payment licenses set floors for capital and risk. Content rules shaped how products were shown. Data rules appeared, first light, then heavier. Platforms adjusted governance, staffed compliance, and built internal audit trails. Friction rose in some places, but trust rose where it counted. Money in, money out, goods in, goods out. Bottlenecks showed at the base of the tech stack. Chips, tools, and cores were imported. So were some sensors and specialty materials. A design could ship fast, but a sanction could stall a node. This exposure turned from a footnote into a policy target. Programs named key sectors and set goals for local capability. Standards began to matter as much as scale. Payment codes needed to scan everywhere. Logistics labels needed to print and read across firms. Smart devices needed to talk without hacks. Firms that shaped a protocol shaped a market. The lesson was old but newly urgent. Design the rules or live by someone else's. Export logic met digital logic. The same discipline that hit ship windows now hit release windows. The same map that moved boxes now moved updates. The same focus on dwell time now focused on app latency. Managers who had cut minutes in docs now cut milliseconds in flows. Culture traveled from ports to platforms. By the mid-2010s, the economy had a second nervous system. One moved steel, copper, and boxes. The other moved bits, payments, and decisions. Together they made small firms look big, and big firms move like small ones. The price of coordination fell. When coordination gets cheap, complexity becomes manageable. The gains were real and the risks were visible. Power concentrated in platforms. Data concentrated in farms and clouds. Foreign dependence at the base of the stack could halt critical lines. The next step was not only to run faster, it was to own more of the core and to write more of the rules. That takes industrial policy with a finer tip and standards that reach beyond borders. It means chips, networks, and protocols, not only apps and ads. The next chapter is that turn. Tech sovereignty and standards, the logic of dual circulation, and how external friction reshaped the map of risk. The brief was simple and hard at once. Run faster, but also own more of the core. Apps and logistics were not enough. Chips, tools, networks, and rules would decide who set the pace. Strategy shifted from volume to control points. Programs named the bones of the stack. High-end machine tools, industrial software, power electronics, sensors, displays, batteries, and cores. Funds appeared with specialist managers. City parks turned into lab blocks with clean rooms. metrology gear, and reliability chambers. The aim was practical: shorten the list of parts that could stop a line. Telecom moved first because the payback was clear. Carriers rolled dense 4G and then 5G with local vendors in the core. Towers, basebands, and antennas scaled with urban demand. Vendor labs sat near operator war rooms, feedback loops got tight, software pushed updates weekly. Bugs that once waited for a release window were patched in days. Standards became a lever, not a footnote. A radio layer that many carriers adopt writes the future of handsets and modules. A payment code that scans everywhere decides whose rails settle the money. A charging protocol fixes voltages, handshakes, and safety checks, then drags cables, chips, and billing along with it. Design the rule and you seed a market. Here is a small standard story. A city mandates a single QR layout for offline payments. Street stalls, clinics, and cabs use it. Acquirers compete on service, not on code shapes. Terminals get simpler. Fraud tools focus on one stream. Users learn one habit. When another city adopts the same layout, intercity travel becomes seamless. The convenience feels local. The network effect is national. Semiconductors exposed the hardest gap. Foundries abroad held the leading nodes. Lithography tools were foreign. Specialty gases and resists were foreign too. The response was layered. Push design firms to climb nodes where possible. Fund equipment makers in niches where speed wins over geometry. Back materials and packaging where learning curves can be steep. Tie research labs to pilot lines so results ship, not only publish. Pocket Math explained the focus. If a phone uses $30 of power management and RF chips, and local alternatives can replace half at similar performance, that saves $15 per unit. On a 10 million unit run, that is $150 million kept in the domestic loop, plus the option value when export rules shift. The numbers justified long benches of engineers. Dual circulation gave the frame. The home market would carry more growth. The export machine would stay, but with more selective risk. Inputs that could be localized would be. Exports would flow where rules and margins made sense. The goal was not autarky. It was elasticity. Bend without breaking when a node fails or a rule changes. The digital currency pilot fit the infrastructure theme. A state wallet with programmable features tested payments without bank cards. Transit and small retail were early cases. Offline modes and hardware wallets appeared in trials. The practical questions mattered most: speed, reliability, settlement costs, and fraud. If a digital rail could handle peaks, it could cut load on existing rails and add options in emergencies. Security and resilience moved into boardrooms. Vendor lists added a second source when possible. Critical components got last-time buys. Firms mapped sub-tier suppliers, not just direct ones. Audits asked where the firmware came from and who signed it. The language of ports and pallets gained a cousin. Firmware versions, code branches, and certificate chains. Export controls and sanctions made the risk real, not theoretical. Some firms lost access to key tools. Schedules slipped. Roadmaps were redrawn. The response was blunt and varied. Stockpile what you can. Redesign around available nodes. Invest in equipment that can improve yield, not only node size. Train more tool service engineers so downtime is measured in hours, not weeks. Universities and institutes adjusted output. Chip design programs expanded. Materials science tied capstones to actual fabs. Metrology became glamorous in a small circle. Students could choose between a live line and a startup lab and feel both were part of a national project. The pipeline was not short-term. It was a statement that the bench would not be empty. Standards diplomacy grew teeth. Firms sent engineers to committees early. Drafts were read and tested on rigs, not only in meetings. Contributions came with code and test vectors. When a draft matched deployed realities, adoption was smoother. When a draft mismatched, Firms built shims and argued for revisions with data, not speeches. A quiet change happened in test and measurement. More local firms made oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, handlers, and reliability ovens good enough for many lines. They did not replace the top tier everywhere, but they replaced imports somewhere every month. Each replacement cut a procurement delay and added a local service call instead of an overseas one. Supply chains rerouted under pressure. Buyers abroad diversified vendors. Some moved small orders to new countries. Some kept core lines but split by product family. This was not an exit, it was a hedge. Plants at home replied by moving up in complexity. If a simple line moved out, a more complex one took its place. The skills moved with the mix. Cloud and AI rode the data that commerce already generated. Recommendation engines increased conversion. Vision models watched lines for defects and saved rework hours. Predictive maintenance learned the rhythm of a press or a furnace and sent a tech before failure. Edge boxes in factories did the first pass. Cloud models did the heavy pass at night. The goal stayed the same. Cut dwell time, cut scrap, keep promises. Privacy and data rules got stricter. Apps faced limits on collection and use. Cross-border transfer required filings. Platforms built dashboards for consent and deletion. Compliance teams grew next to growth teams. Costs rose in the short run. Trust rose in the long run. Merchants and users learned what could be done and what could not. Clear rules are a speed tool when everyone knows them. Energy hardware became a flagship. Solar module efficiencies climbed. Inverters became smarter and more grid-friendly. Battery pack lines scaled from scooters to buses and trucks. The export case was hard to ignore. Falling unit costs abroad pulled orders. Local deployment proved reliability at scale. Learning rates were visible in contracts and on rooftops. Here is pocket math from a developer's sheet. A panel price drop of 5 cents per watt on a 10 megawatt project saves $500,000. If inverters and racking shave another 2 cents, the project crosses a threshold. The bank underwrites. The project gets built. Cheaper hardware is not a slide. It is a switch that flips a no to a yes. Geopolitics added friction and feedback. A tariff here, a blacklist there, a licensing delay in a third place. Each added cost or delay pushed firms to redesign, refile, or relocate part of a step. This did not stop the system, it reshaped it. Contracts added clauses for rule changes. Inventory strategies kept an extra month of critical inputs. Legal teams sat closer to operations. The domestic consumer stack matured under rules. Fintech tightened to reduce leverage risk. EdTech reset to fit policy on minors and content. Ride-hailing and delivery faced new safety and employment standards. Platforms tweaked fees and tools to keep small merchants on board while meeting caps and audits. The pattern held: experiment, expand, legalize, then standardize. Government bought like a system builder. Procurement favored interoperable gear with open enough interfaces. City platforms integrated traffic lights, cameras, flood sensors, and transit cards under common protocols. Vendors had to pass conformance tests to join. Once inside, upgrades were easier to roll across districts. Fragmentation fell. This saved time when it mattered most. A flood, a spike, a surge. Weak spots remained. High-end lithography and some EDA tools were still offshore. Some specialty chemicals had few suppliers. Talent depth at the very top tiers took decades to build. The answer was patience with milestones. Hit a yield target, then a throughput target, then a cost target. Celebrate the targets, not the slogans. Management culture shifted again. Hardware firms hired more firmware and DevOps. Software firms hired more reliability engineers and compliance officers. Procurement wrote second source into contracts. Risk was not a paragraph at the end of a plan. It was a column in the daily dashboard. By the early 2020s, the map had new anchors. Local vendors dominated in networks and many power electronics. Battery and solar ecosystems reached global scale. payments, and logistics set norms at home and influenced forms abroad. Chips and tools were still a race, but the bench was on the field. The economy could run with less guesswork about its core parts. The logic of standards reached beyond borders. A connector chosen by a fleet in one region pulled suppliers there. A payment rail used by tourists taught shops to accept it. A logistics label that scanners in 3 countries could read cut errors on handovers. Rules were products. Products were rules. Whoever shipped working rules first won terrain. This set the stage for the outer ring. Finance and build assets abroad. Export green hardware at falling prices. Embed standards in projects and tie service and parts to those standards. Partners would gain cheaper energy, faster logistics, and new industry. They would also gain new dependencies on components, codes, and credit. The external perimeter would decide how far the domestic playbook could travel. What terms would lenders set? How would ports, rails, and grids fit local politics? Which standards would stick? The next chapter takes that turn outward. Supply chains across borders, infrastructure finance, green exports, and the balance of benefit and risk for partners. The map turned outward. Supply chains crossed borders. Finance followed them. Standards traveled with both. The goal was clear: make production, delivery, and service work in more places, while keeping control of the parts that matter. Factories seeded satellites. Some steps moved to neighbors to balance costs, rules, and market access. Plastics and stamping went where land was cheaper. Final assembly went where tariffs were lower. Molds, motors, cells, and displays often stayed at home. Tooling, test jigs, and core components crossed borders with engineers and checklists. The result was +1, not -1. Overseas parks used a familiar template. Plots came with power, water, and a customs window. Permits sat behind one counter, not many. Dorms and canteens were shared. A bonded shed kept kits and spares close. Local officials wanted jobs and exports. Firms wanted predictable rules and lead times that matched their master schedules. A workable deal formed in many places. Logistics stitched the new map. Carriers added direct sailings. Rail spurs reached inland depots. Cross-docks near airports handled parcels for online sales. Overseas warehouses cut delivery from weeks to days. Returns flowed to regional hubs instead of back to origin. The pitch to buyers was simple: order today, receive within the week, handle returns locally. Here is the merchant math in plain words. Shipping 1 unit from origin costs about $12 per order. Sending a pallet to an overseas warehouse can cut that to about $3 per unit after storage. If expected returns are 8%, the warehouse still wins on average because local handling is cheaper than international reverse logistics. Faster delivery also lifts conversion by a few points. The spreadsheet ends the argument. Finance moved as a package, not as pieces. Export credit insured buyers. Project loans for ports, rails, and power came with grace periods and long maturities. Vendors offered financing for equipment tied to service contracts. Some deals pledged revenue from tolls or power sales. Others used land or future taxes as the backstop. Currency risk never vanished. It was managed, not ignored. Engineering, procurement, and construction contracts traveled with standards. A port crane ran the same software as a crane at home. A substation used relays and communication rules that a local technician could learn in a month. A solar farm used inverters with remote monitoring in a familiar interface. The point was serviceability. When a breaker tripped at 3 in the morning, a technician abroad could read the same screen that a control room saw at home. Standards quietly locked in markets. A charging plug and handshake fixed how vehicles drew power. A common payment code fixed how money cleared in tourist districts. A logistics label fixed how scanners read cartons at handover points. Vendors that matched the rule booked orders. Vendors that did not match waited outside the gate. In practice, rules were products, and products were rules. Green hardware led the export wave. Solar panels, inverters, and racks pushed the cost of solar down. Battery packs moved from scooters to buses and grid rooms. Electric cars won on total cost in clear use cases long before they won hearts. The claim was not ideology, it was arithmetic. Here is the bus operator's sheet in simple terms. A diesel bus burns fuel and oil worth 40 to 50 cents per kilometer, plus maintenance. An electric bus with cheaper night power and falling battery prices can run at 20 to 30 cents per kilometer. Over 200 kilometers a day, the gap is $40 to $60 per bus per day. Over a fleet and a year, the gap can pay for charges and the next batch of vehicles. Solar economics told the same story. Module prices dropped a few cents per watt. Inverters and racking shaved a few more cents. On a 10 megawatt project, a total drop of 7 cents per watt saves $700,000. If that pushes the project's levelized cost under a bank threshold, the loan is approved and the array gets built. Cheaper hardware flips a no to a yes. The export was not only boxes, it was also the replacement cycle and the service loop. Spare parts sat in regional depots. Predictive maintenance alerts went to both the local operator and the vendor's service desk. A swap crew carried the right module on the first visit because failure codes were standardized. The customer paid for uptime. The vendor sold uptime. Incentives aligned. Risks traveled with the benefits. Partners gained cheaper energy, faster logistics, and new industrial jobs. They also gained new dependencies. A delayed shipment of a niche part could pause a line. A software update tied to a vendor's cadence could delay a feature. A financing covenant could bite when a currency moved. Constraints often showed up only when an exception hit. Policy pushed back and pulled forward at once. Some markets set local content rules. Some raised duties or opened anti-dumping cases. Others signed regional trade frameworks that cut border friction. Firms adjusted. Kits replaced finished goods to meet rules. Final assembly moved across a line on the map. The core stayed close to home where standards and scale were strongest. Supply chains diversified on both sides. Buyers abroad added second sources. Vendors at home split product trees. A simple line might move out, a complex one might stay. New countries learned to cut foam, bend steel, and solder boards. The first batches were rough. The second batches were fine. Time smoothed edges where demand was steady and training stuck. Tourism and small retail tested cross-border phone payments. Travelers paid with codes on their screens. Shops saw funds settle at acceptable rates and speeds. Regulators set caps and reporting. Platforms built compliance modules. Where rules were clear, adoption grew. Where rules were vague, pilots paused. The lesson from earlier chapters held, clarity is speed. Shipping and insurance refit to the new map. Carriers added capacity on lanes that linked new clusters. Insurers priced political and port risk in live models, not once a year. Contracts added clauses for rule changes and strikes. Warehouses kept plans for rerouting within a week. A storm, a tariff list, or a protest did not end flows. It redrew them. Data rules crossed borders more slowly. Product information and inventory were easy. Personal data and payments were hard. Firms built twin systems. One stack for home, one for abroad, with bridges were allowed. Engineers learned to write to several standards at once. It was not elegant, but it shipped. A quiet export was management habit. Schedules, quality logs, and maintenance routines traveled better than mission statements. A plant that hit ship windows at home hit them abroad. A port that measured dwell time at home measured it abroad. A grid that planned night maintenance at home did the same abroad. Culture, in this sense, was a playbook of checklists. Debt risk became a public debate in some partner countries. When traffic or power sales missed forecasts, cash flows pinched. Renegotiations pushed maturities out. Some projects were mothballed or repurposed. Results were mixed because projects were mixed. Ports with throughput grew into their debt. Vanity lines did not. The cure was dull but true. Pick projects with clear users, match currency to revenue, and publish the math. Geopolitics never left the room. Tensions, elections, and new blocks changed the weather. Some projects froze. Others accelerated because a window opened. Firms that survived kept options open. Several ports, several tool chains, several legal shells. Optionality is expensive in a calm market and priceless in a storm. The export of electric vehicles met protection at borders. Some markets tightened rules or raised duties. Firms replied with local assembly and service centers. They stocked spares and trained technicians. They leaned on after-sales as the moat. A fast repair time can win a city contract when a tariff wipes out a price edge. Upstream materials were the plain backbone. Cathode powders, separators, electrolytes, and anodes moved in drums and bags. Contracts mixed spot and long-term pricing. Recycling pilots turned scrap and end-of-life packs into feedstock. The dream was a closed loop. The practice was a partial loop with improving yields. Regional trade frameworks lowered some walls. Rules of origin set thresholds. Accumulation let parts from several members count as local. Firms mapped bills of materials to meet the letter and the spirit. Compliance became a product feature. It unlocked margin just like a better motor or a lighter frame. The outcome was uneven but clear. The price of green hardware fell worldwide. Time to shelf for many goods fell. New industrial jobs appeared in places that had not seen them. At the same time, more systems depended on components and code concentrated in a few ecosystems. Resilience improved at the edge and stayed tight at some cores. One last piece of merchant math makes the point. An overseas warehouse cuts delivery from 9 days to 3 and lifts conversion by 3 percentage points on a product with a $30 contribution margin. On 10,000 monthly orders, that is $9,000 more contribution. Over a year, that pays for the warehouse lease and the local manager, with change left over. The model is arithmetic, not magic. By the early 2020s, the outer ring had a shape. Parks, ports, warehouses, and service centers formed a web. Financing, insurance, and compliance filled the gaps. Standards stitched the web. Green exports sped the energy shift for partners while deepening ties in components. The system worked because it kept the clocks aligned. Factory clocks, port clocks, truck clocks, and app clocks. The trade-off is now explicit. Partners want price, speed, and service without single-point dependence. Vendors want volume, standards, and predictable rules without political whiplash. The stable answer is a clear architecture of roles and incentives that everyone can read. That brings the story back to the core model. The state sets direction and builds the big pipes. The market supplies scale and discipline. Technology turns coordination into code and standards. Together, they make the external perimeter possible and fragile at once. The payoff that follows will compress the lessons into a small, usable frame, state, market, and technology, and list the mechanisms that carry influence and the limits that stop it. Time to compress the story into one frame: state, market, and technology. The state sets direction and builds pipes. It funds rails, ports, grids, and fiber. It allows experiments, then legalizes what works. It writes standards that lower friction. It buys like a system builder and measures like an engineer. The market supplies scale and pressure. Provinces and firms compete on time, cost, and quality. Capital follows purchase orders and delivery records. Clusters learn by doing and copy what pays. Technology turns coordination into code. It removes milliseconds and meters. It makes interfaces stable so many actors can move as one. The edges matter as much as the nodes. State plus market gives sandboxes with scoreboards. Try fast, measure fast, spread fast. State plus technology gives standards, security, and basic rails everyone can use. Market plus technology gives platforms, last-mile logistics, and factory software. Together, they price time down. When time gets cheap, more projects pass the hurdle rate. That is the engine. Here are the outward channels of influence. Logistics first: ports, schedules, dry ports, and bonded lanes that shrink distance. Prices next: learning curves that push unit costs lower abroad and at home. Standards, plugs, labels, payment codes, and test methods that travel. Skills: managers, tool makers, line leaders, and planners trained by repetition. Capital: credit lines, export insurance, and project finance that match real cash cycles. Data, forecasts, scans, and APIs that move decisions forward by days. Payments, escrow, and fast settlement that pull small sellers into formal trade. Commodities, steady demand that changes mines, mills, and shipping lanes. Green hardware, panels, inverters, cells, and motors that flip projects from no to yes. Infrastructure finance, cranes, rails, and grids bundled with service contracts. Protocols, telecom layers, and device handshakes that set future choices. Consumer ecosystems, marketplaces, and apps that standardize how people buy and return. Keep the math plain. 1 day of delay at a 0.5% penalty eats 6% of an 8% margin. A 7-cent drop per watt on 10 megawatts saves $700,000 and unlocks bank funding. A 1-second faster page keeps enough buyers to pay for the next server. Small deltas, large outcomes. What can be copied? Discipline in delivery. 1 counter for permits, 1 clock for approvals, public targets for dwell time. Regional competition with a common scoreboard and rewards for throughput, not slogans. Customs that scan, seal, and clear by the hour. Dry ports and inland sealing to pull interior regions into export schedules. Regulatory sandboxes with sunset dates and measured outcomes. Procurement that favors interoperable gear and publishes conformance tests. Fast payment rails with escrow and clear dispute rules. Vocational pipelines for line leaders, tool setters, and planners. Simple export finance for proven delivery records. What is hard to copy? Scale of the home market and the gravity it creates. A command chain that can align land, power, and concrete at speed. Coastal geography next to deep capital and buyers. A dense bench of engineers and technicians across hardware and software. Long fiscal stamina for multi-year build-outs. A tolerance for fast land and zoning decisions that some systems cannot accept. Concentration of platforms that amplifies speed but raises policy risks. Use a short checklist to act. Pick 1 choke point and remove it this quarter. Publish the time it takes to get a permit, a truck slot, or a custom seal. Pay operators by availability and uptime, not by concrete poured. Put a dry port where factories actually are. Adopt 1 common QR and 1 logistics label across agencies. Open timetables and freight slots by API. Train 1,000 line leaders and tool techs before funding the next park. Second source 1 critical component and write it into contracts. Test a standard at home, then take it to a regional forum with real data. Tie export credit to service level guarantees so uptime is the product. Know the limits and risks. Local debt can swell if demand is misread. Environmental and land costs arrive with a lag. Demography tightens labor pools. External controls on chips and tools can stall plans. Platform concentration can turn a service failure into a systemic failure. The answer is dull and strong. Diversify sources, publish the math, and keep clocks visible to everyone in the chain. The core insight is not about cheap labor. It is about cheap time, stable standards, and predictable clocks. State sets the pipes and the rules. Market fills them and enforces discipline. Technology knits both into systems that scale. When those 3 align, prices fall, service rises, and maps redraw. When they drift, costs creep back in. Hold the alignment and the model travels. Lose it and the model stalls. This is the payoff of 40 years, reduced to a frame you can use tomorrow. 40 years turned a scarcity economy into an engine that sets clocks for others. The method was not mystery, it was alignment. State, market, and technology moved on one timetable. The core is simple. Make time cheap, keep standards stable, publish predictable schedules. When the price of a minute falls, projects clear the bar. Prices drop, service improves, maps shift. The path was incremental. Rural incentives, coastal zones, urban funnels, global rules, crisis used as a build window, digital rails on top of concrete rails, tech control points and standards, an outer ring of parks, ports, and green exports. What travels is practical. One counter for permits, one dashboard for dwell times, inland sealing and dry ports, competition between regions with public scoreboards, regulatory sandboxes with sunset dates, fast payment rails with escrow, training for line leaders, tool setters, and planners. What rarely travels whole is context, home market scale. A command chain that can align land, power, and concrete at speed. Deep technical benches across hardware and software. Long fiscal stamina. These are limits, not excuses. Work with them in view. Use a short action set. Pick one choke point this quarter. Measure it, remove it, publish the gain. Tie pay to uptime, not to concrete poured. Require second sources for one critical part. Adopt one QR and one logistics label across agencies. Put APIs on timetables and truck gates. Train people before building the next park. Keep risks visible. Local debt. Land and environmental costs with a lag. Tight labor pools. External controls on chips and tools. Platform concentration. Treat risk as a column on the daily board, not as a paragraph at the end. The takeaway is clear. Cheap labor did not write the playbook. Cheap time did. Standards did. Predictable clocks did. Hold the alignment and the system compounds. Lose it and costs creep back in. Save this episode to return to the State X Market X technology model. Share it with a colleague who works on permits, logistics, or payments. In the comments, name one mechanism you already see at work in your country. Logistics, prices, standards, skills, capital, data, payments, commodities, green tech, infrastructure finance, protocols, or consumer ecosystems. If you want a follow-up, I will build a transferability checklist by region, what to copy as is, what to adapt, and what to avoid. I can also map a country case with a 90-day bottleneck plan and a 1-year scoreboard. Thank you for watching. Keep your clocks visible, keep your standards stable, make minutes cheap.